Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
This is another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and I have Mark D'Ambrosio. And Mark's a special guy. Why? Because he served our country as a sniper, and he did things that other people will never have to be called to do. And I want to thank you for that, Mark. And also, he's the long-range shooter instructor at Branded Rock Canyon Ranch. Is that right, Mark?
That's correct.
And that's outside of Quebec, Colorado, and we're going to be talking about that. So, Mark, welcome to the show, and let's talk about how you got into the hunting world.
Okay, yeah, thanks for having me. So, starting off getting the hunting world when I was 10, I grew up in Florida and started hunting whitetails and hunting until I was about 22 when I joined the Marine Corps. So, when I joined the Marine Corps, I knew that I wanted to do something. I wanted to be a sniper. I knew that I wanted to be a reconnaissance Marine, so I went straight into reconnaissance. And by that, I mean, I was given a chance to try out. I had trained for 2 years prior. So I gained about 40 pounds in weight and got good at rucking around with a lot of weight on my back. So when I joined, I made it into the reconnaissance battalions. And then I went to scout sniper school shortly thereafter. So from there, all these fieldcraft and bushcraft skills you learn, also how to operate as a small team. And with that, you're learning things like tracking and survival. And then with obviously the sniper, you're learning the long range shooting. But more importantly, you're learning skills like stalking and fieldcraft and things that are kind of a dying skill set nowadays, I'd say. Just fewer and fewer people have these skill sets. So I love doing that type of mission. I loved going out and being a sniper. So in 2012, I went to Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California, and I instructed the Mountain High Angle Sniper course and the Mountain Survival course. So from there, that's where I got a passion for instructing. I love being able to take the information and the knowledge and pass it on to other folks. And I was instructing everyone, all special operations branches in the DoD, as well as internationally, and then law enforcement as well would come up to our course. From there, went to second recon, ended up getting out of the Marine Corps after about a little more than 9 years. And I started up a business where I was teaching individuals long range shooting, survival, mountaineering, and tracking. And then a little more than a year ago, Amy contacted me with Branded Rock Canyon and asking me to come up there and take a look at the place and if I'd be interested in instructing up there for them from the months of about April to August. So when they weren't doing their hunts, their elk and their mule deer hunts, then we'd be teaching courses. So last August, we made a video going up there and being able to show people the capabilities of Branded Rock Canyon. When I first went there, I was blown away because of the terrain. So when we're talking about realistic shooting and training for hunting situations, this place has got it all. Yeah, so I went up there and I've been working with them ever since. And now we're doing long range hunter courses. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, the definition of long range and what that is. But we also do 3-gun courses, long range courses, and we do some survival stuff up there too. So preparing that hunter for any situation that may come across.
And folks, Amy Martin Schaffer was a world-class Olympic sculler. I guess that's the right word to say. And she did participate in the Olympics. And she also ran Pro Hunting Concierge, where she made it possible for people to hunt all around the world. As well as herself, she has hunted all around the world. So when you go to Branded Rock Canyon, you're dealing with a lady that's been there, done that, in a lot of different levels. But the thing I love best about Amy is that she's just a wonderful human being. You can't ask for a better human being. And I wish her all the success at Branded Rock Canyon, because I've been there when it was Kessler Canyon, and I've been on the grounds, and it's a world-class 5-star facility. And I'm sure Mark would agree to that. So Amy has a shout out for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a free one.
Impressive. I went to Shoot Show with them this year, and talk about knowing absolutely everyone in the hunting world. She knows them. So she's awesome. And you're right. Her personality and who she is as a person, her and her husband, Dan, both just amazing people. So it's a lot of fun going up there and working with people of this quality. So
Did you meet Brian at the sheep show?
I did meet Brian. I spent about 30 minutes talking to him, and it's funny because we were both so busy, but we couldn't stop talking about guns and shooting, and it was awesome.
Brian runs Asian Mountain Outfitters. So if you want to go to Turkestan, if you want to go to the stands and go after Marco Polo, Brian's probably the foremost outfitter to do that in the world. I'm gushing folks because they're world-class people. I count them as personal friends, and I'm excited that Mark's a part of that outfit. Let's turn it back to you, Mark. And you told me in the warm-up that you started hunting whitetails down in Florida at 10 years old. So let's talk about the lessons learned there as it's turned out into, a career path for you.
Yeah, so hunting whitetails in Florida, a little bit different than hunting whitetails in some of the other spots of the country. But as far as distance shooting, your average shots were about, anything from 50 to 150 meters or yards. Let's talk yards. Sorry, I'm all used to talking meters, but 175 yards, that's a long way when we're talking about shooting sometimes. And back in Florida, if you're shooting 200 yards, 300 yards, that's an accomplishment. So I grew up with that mindset that 200-300 yards is a long ways away. And then I joined the military, and now we're shooting 500 yards with open sights. And, I'm using an optic shooting out to 300 yards. Now I'm shooting 500 yards with open sights when I first joined. And then we moved to the RCO and stuff like that. And obviously it enhances your ability to shoot further using optics. So when I went through sniper school, we were using a 3 to 12 power optic. And now we're pushing out to 1,000 meters. So about 1,100 yards. But so growing up in Florida, I was hunting whitetail. I would call it close ranges, anything where you don't really have to do a holdover depending on what caliber you're shooting, but you don't have to do a holdover on your target in order to hit it. It's pretty close range. So when we start pushing out past that, where we have to know what we have to do to our turrets on our scope, or where we have to hold with our reticle, then that's when we start talking, okay, we're pushing into the medium range distances and into long range. So got into that by hunting whitetail. When I moved to Bridgeport, California to instruct the high angle course, I started hunting a lot of mule deer in the Sierra Nevadas. And that's when the game definitely, for my hunting world, changed, because I went from maybe a power line in Florida that you can get out to 200-300 meters to you could be hunting from ridgeline to ridgeline, or from on top of a ridge down into a draw. And we're talking now it's 400, 500, 600 yards. And that's a big difference when you're talking about on a moving animal and depending on what size animal you're shooting. So
yeah, it is. And I'm thinking back in the whitetail world, folks, you might be thinking, why is Bruce having a long range person on the show? One, because long range shooting it's a thing that people are doing. Best of the West builds guns. There's many gun makers that are on TV today making 1,000-yard shots. And some of these shots are set up and all the person does is pull the trigger. They build the gun, they build the rounds, they set the trigger, they do everything for the gun, and then they set up the gun and shoot. So there's a lot of different information about long range shooting. So that's why I was excited to have Mark on. And just a side thing for Mark, he was at Banner Rock Canyon and he jumped in the pond. When was that? When did you do that?
That was actually, I think it was last week. Yeah, last week.
So in the middle of winter, it's below 32 degrees. He's got a full pack on and he's doing some survival skills. And so I looked at that. And I said, I got to talk to this guy because one, it's crazy to do that. If you've ever fallen through the ice, unfortunately, I did that once and I'm still alive. So it worked out just fine. But those are skills, and we're going to talk about that later in the show, that you need to know, because if you're in the backcountry and you're up against it, there's some things that you need to have the skill sets to get out of, a death threatening type of thing. But again, I was motivated to get a hold of Mark. We did, and we get him now on the show. So Mark, let's go to the definition of long range shooting in your mind.
Yeah. So when we're talking long range, it's different in which category we're shooting in. So if we're shooting competition, long range is different than if we're in the hunting world. If we're shooting law enforcement, right? If we're a law enforcement sniper versus a military sniper, long range is extremely different because with law enforcement, I have to hit this person in an immediate incapacitation area. With military, I need to pretty much stop the threat, or I don't have as many parameters around where I have to hit. If I hit somebody in a military situation with a round, that's going to put them out of the fight more than likely. It's going to make them less effective. Law enforcement, that's not a thing. So when we start talking about in the hunting world, long range hunting, I would compare it more to the law enforcement long range side, whereas you have to be more precise and more accurate. And you don't have the ability to hit this animal outside of the kill zone. So with that being said, we've advanced in technology with laser rangefinders, with knowing the exact distance, with our optics and our guns, and the ability to buy a rifle right off the rack and shoot 1,000 meters or 1,000 yards or 1,200, 1,500 yards, depending on what caliber you're getting. And long range is just not that simple. So we can't go out there with the mindset that we're going to be able to go out there and shoot we'll say on a mule deer, we'll say we're not going to go out there and shoot a 10-inch plate at 1,000 yards every single time, knowing that, we'll say we know that we're going to hit it inside that 10 inches. We can't say that for sure. If we have 8 to 10 gusting mile-an-hour wind, we're in a canyon, terrain features, et cetera, long range may now be 600 yards. And 1,000 yards is now just out of the question because you're not certain you're going to be able to hit in there. Because at the end of the day, if we're shooting and we can't get a first round impact on an animal in the kill zone, then we failed because now we're just shooting and we're injuring animals. So long range depends on the conditions. It depends on the caliber selection. It depends on your skills as a shooter, not only on being able to pull that trigger, but now being able to call wind. So long range may be in perfect situations. If you're down in a draw in the morning time, there's very little wind and you have the ability to shoot in the similar terrain. You're not shooting across a canyon, but you can read wind off the ground based off a mirage or the plant life that's going on. Then long range, you may be able to take a 1,000-yard shot. But if, say, we're up on this ridge line now, right, and it's middle of the afternoon, it's getting late towards the evening, the winds are shifting, I can only feel the wind at my position. I look down across this canyon to the other finger that we're shooting onto, and the animal's on another finger. If we're shooting from ridgeline to ridgeline, from finger to finger, and I can't read wind in the middle, that's a risky shot. So I've seen a lot of shots on YouTube that, kind of concern me where guys are having these nice expensive guns built and they have the ability to shoot that far, yet their shots don't hit the first time. They correct it and then they hit the animal in the second shot. That's fine when they miss and then they hit the animal if you're shooting a target, right? If we're shooting something that is not going to get wounded, that's fine. But whenever I see that and I see a second shot on an animal, I see that as a failure. And that person probably shouldn't have taken that shot to begin with. So that person was outside of their long range abilities when it comes to hunting, if that makes sense. So long range, there are times when you can shoot 1,000 meters on an animal. There's also times when 500 meters is long range. And a lot of guys are like, 500 meters, that's nothing. I can shoot 500 meters in a 20 mile an hour wind. But the ability to be able to call wind is something that no one's perfect at. And so since wind is the biggest determining factor on where your round is going to go, if it's a heavy wind or the most unpredictable, right? Because it's constantly changing. So that's what I look at a long range shooter and their abilities and on how good they are is how well they can call wind and bring it on the target. Because there's a lot of different ballistic solvers out there these days we can use. We don't even need ballistic solvers. We could gather data, but there's so much technology as far as the elevation of our round and how to predict that that's not the hard part. The hard part is reading wind. So, as far as long range shooting is concerned, it all depends on the environment, your gun setup, and your skills as a shooter and reading wind. So,
two things on firing solutions and doping the wind. Those are two things that I've learned for my personal kill distance, because I remember I shot across the canyon and I took out a shoulder on a goat. But if you ever hunted mountain goats, they're tougher than snot. I mean, his shoulder was gone, yet he's still walking away. And I hit him again and he went down and then we got him. But I was just thinking of just saying, so my first shot was actually a failure. He was at 440 yards across the canyon and it was quiet wind and everything. But I had exceeded, I was shooting a Nosler 165 bullet at 2,800 feet per second, blah, blah, blah. And I thought I had the ballistics all ranged in, but I was off. I was just off, and I wasn't using a ballistic scope. So I couldn't click it in. So I had to do some holdover in my own mind just because of the distance. And I was thinking of that. So I hit him. And yes, would he have died? Yes, there's no question about it. But I like to put things down. And the thing I wanted to bring out about long range shooting, it's your responsibility when you pull the trigger to ethically put that game down with one shot or don't take the shot. That's my whole axiom on long distance shooting.
And that's a common misconception out there. When people hear me say I like long range hunting, they think that I'm out there shooting past distances that are unethical. And that's not the case at all. The fact of the matter is you got to be able to determine what long range is that day for your capabilities. And you got to be humble enough to be able to stop and say, no, I can't take this shot, or yes, I can. So
let's get back to my adjective. Is dope in the wind, is that a correct statement, or is that something holdover from years gone by?
I wouldn't say doping the wind. I guess you could, but dope stands for data of previous engagement. So you're learning from each and every shot. So I wouldn't say doping the wind, but yeah, I just say reading the wind, and then dialing for wind is what a lot of people will say.
Let's talk about that, because in the warm-up, I talked about being situations on the farm I hunt every fall. I can take up to 300-yard shots, and it's across the valley. And I found that in the morning, I'm a lot more effective, or I'm a lot more confident than I am one in the afternoon. If I'm an all-day sit, it's gun season, and I'm shooting does as they're coming off the farm across the pastures, and there's a valley between us. And so, I'm confident until the wind comes up. Then I get a little edgy because I have missed deer. I've flat out missed them. I'm going, what the heck am I missing?
Getting good at long range shooting, really you're getting good at calling wind. So pulling the trigger, anybody can pretty much get behind the gun, learn how to pull the trigger. We'll say we're shooting a flat terrain in Florida, and we're shooting out to 1,000 meters. Say we got a power line, and we're shooting out to 1,000 meters, because normally you can't shoot out that far in a place like Florida, but we're shooting down power lines, and we need to make multiple wind calls. So depending on if we have roads cutting across the flight of our projectile, or maybe we've got some open tree lines in between, we've got to be able to read the wind and what it's doing from yourself, and then not only at your position, at the target, but also in between. And depending on how far out you're shooting, depends on how many different wind calls you're going to have to make. But you have to pretty much add and subtract and do the math to be able to come up with a wind call that's going to work for that range with all the multiple different winds going on. Now, if we can look on a flat range and we can tell that the wind is going to do something specific at each 0 to 300, 300 to 700, and 700 to 1,000, we can account for that, and that's easy. You take that same shooter and you put him up in the mountains, and now we're shooting from one ridge line to the next ridge line, or one ridge line, we'll say down into a draw. You're able to read the wind at yourself, and you're able to read the wind at the target, but you're not able to read the wind in between, unless you have a terrain feature in between.
So I'm shooting from the ridge top, and the bull or the cow, it doesn't matter what it is, the animal is down in the bottom of the canyon, and he doesn't know that I'm there, so he's calm, not all spooked or anything. So he's a calmed animal, and that's one thing that I've found. I don't want to shoot 300, 400 yards at a disturbed animal, certainly not a moving animal. But if they're not right, if they're not just calm and just hanging out, then I don't want to shoot at them. That's personal. Other people go, well, you can do that. But what's your thought on that before we go to the actual setup?
Yeah, a calm animal is a more predictable animal. So when we start talking about taking a long range shot on an animal that we don't know whether or not he's going to take one step forward or turn around or swing his head in the wrong direction, and now we may be having a round hit somewhere in the face, I totally agree. So I think when we're talking about shooting at these ranges at past 400 or 500 yards, most of them are pretty calm, unless you were really heinous getting them into position. At that kind of range, you'd have to really be lacking all stalking skills and field skills and slow movement and camouflage in order to really spook that animal. Even in winds, with the winds and your scent pushing down to the animal, that's pretty far away for them to really get spooked pretty quick.
let's go back. I'm on a ridge. There's a bull elk down at the bottom, and it's a pretty steep, it's 800 yards and it's downhill. What do you consider a steep angle for shooting?
High angle is anything above, technically, I think high angle is anything above 45 degrees or 30 degrees. So high angle is anything above 30 degrees. So
let's go there. So it's a bull elk, 800 yards, high angle, and then you can throw in the variables.
Okay, so if we're taking a shot and we're taking a 30-degree angle shot down to 800 yards on a bull elk, and that means that, well, honestly, that's a pretty steep shot, so we may be able to actually read the wind. But say we're taking a 17-degree angle shot on a bull elk at 800 yards. For reading wind, this is what we're talking about. So I've got to be able to take the terrain into consideration. So I have to be able to know how wind moves across terrain features. And wind moves a lot like water moves if we think of it like that. So I have to be able to know, hey, what does wind do in the morning? What does wind do in the evening? So you got your adiabatic winds in the morning that, they're coming uphill. You got your katabatic winds in the evening that are going downhill. These sorts of things are things we have to take into consideration because we can kind of assume that this is what's happening. But then I have to be able to know what that actually means because people hear anabatic and katabatic winds. They don't realize that that's on a major terrain feature, and you may not be placed on a major terrain feature. So when reading wind for this particular bull elk that's that far away, I've got to be able to take that into consideration. Hey, is it 4 miles an hour gusting 6? And is it just at my position? Is it doing the same thing down there at the target? If it's doing the same thing at the target and my position, then I'm pretty comfortable making a shot like that. But I also have to take into consideration the flight path of my bullet. And where my bullet's going is not where I'm able to read wind usually. It's not on an 800-yard target. My bullet is flying higher than I can actually read wind, especially in terrain like I'm talking about right now. So the higher we go, usually we'll notice that the wind starts picking up a little bit because there's not as many terrain features blocking it, but that all depends. So if we're taking a shot on an 800-yard elk, we've got a 20-inch kill diameter on this animal and 17 degrees. So we're reading the wind at our position. We're reading the wind at the target. We're looking in between. And if we can, and we have a hillside off to the left or the right, and we can read wind off the top of that hillside, maybe this is where our projectile is flying, right? Then I'll look all the way to the right and I'll read that way. And you're taking as many of these considerations into play. Now, if it's in the morning and we've got some heavy winds, 800 yards, we may not be able to make that shot in this specific situation. So we may, hey, let's go ahead and move over from this ridge line, come down, get to within about 500, and then take the shot. That's well within reason. But if we were taking that 30-degree angle shot like you were talking about earlier, now that's when we start talking about, hey, I can actually read the wind a little bit easier because of what's coming off the slopes and how close I am to this slope specifically. So I may have some brush that I can read the wind off of. A lot of times you're dealing with things like these pinyon pines and this Artemisia or sagebrush. Everybody calls it sagebrush, but sagebrush, it doesn't really move when the wind blows. We're talking about a plant that has evolved over thousands of years to deal with heavy winds. So when we're talking about shooting over here in the West and we're dealing with sagebrush, that's a plant that's really a hard plant to try and utilize for reading wind. So we pretty much have to go off of mirage. If there are some indicators out there, we've got to learn what those indicators are. If I see sagebrush moving, that means the wind is booking it. So, and you can usually tell right then and there. You may be in a position where you're up on a hill and you don't feel any wind. And if you don't take the time to look down at your target or look at this hillside to the left or the right if you have one, then you may not realize that it's a 10, 15 mile an hour gust coming through there. And you're not going to be anywhere close to your target. So reading wind is an art form, but it's a skill learned. But always, no matter what, it's an estimated guess. So it's your best estimated guess on what the wind is doing at that moment. So from the second that the bullet leaves the muzzle to it hits the animal, it's doing something different, or it could be doing something different. So we have to be able to get as close as possible. And we're talking within, sometimes when we're shooting long range, within 1 mile an hour, depending on how far we're going. Within 1 mile an hour, we have to call that wind in order to hit the target in our kill zone. That's not always the case. If we're shooting at 500 meters, we can be off a little bit more with our wind, but we always want to shoot for is within 1 mile an hour as far as our capabilities. And there's very, very few people that can actually read wind within 1 mile an hour. So I would say that it's one of the hardest things to be able to do. It 100% is.
Folks, the biggest thing that I just picked up is you got to have excellent optics, and not to shoot the animal, but to read the wind. And by doing that, then you're going to be far ahead. And obviously you should have a notebook. Do you have a notebook with you so you can write all this stuff down so you don't have to?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Don't try to do it in your brain and figure it out.
No. And while you're out there hunting, you have this notebook with you and you're taking notes down, you're jotting notes down. Hey, what's the wind doing all the time? Everything. If you're looking down, you may not even see your animal yet. You may not have seen anything all day, but you're noting what the wind is doing. And while you're moving, hey, what's the wind doing on these certain terrain features? So yeah, absolutely. Writing things down is imperative.
Yeah. And that's something, if you're going to go into the long distance shooting arena, that you have to do, because it's that critical. And I sort of knew a little bit. I'm finding out a heck of a lot more, talking with Mark this morning. But when you think about it, it comes back to when you pull the trigger, you want that elk, deer, antelope, sheep, goat, whatever you're shooting long distance, to die. You want to put that bullet, whatever caliber of choice, whatever gun you'd set up, everything comes down to you squeezing the trigger. And we're going to talk about handling the trigger next, because I think my thing is read the wind and then your shot, because you get all the ballistics. Everybody can figure out how to figure out the angles and what gravity is going to do to your bullet and everything. We just talked about the wind, but now we got to squeeze the trigger. So talk to me about squeezing the trigger effectively, efficiently, and correctly for long distance shooting.
Yeah. So when we're talking about squeezing the trigger, first, that means that we already have a solid position. So the butt stocks in the correct spot in our shoulder, we're able to load our weapon in some way, shape, or form if we're shooting a weapon system that's got a lot of recoil. So we'll say our position is solid and we have a great position. Our head's on the gun the same way each and every time. There's a checklist going from the muzzle of your weapon system to your feet, pretty much, where you're checking absolutely everything. And we're not going to hit on that because that would take a little bit too long. So you go through that checklist and you're like, everything's good. My cant, my elevation, my turrets, it's come down to you pulling that trigger. So we thinking about, okay, well, we got to concentrate on our breathing. We got to get our heart rate to where it's not jumping all around. So we want to be relaxed. We want to be as relaxed as possible. We want to have bone support in our position, and muscular relaxation is what they call it. So when it comes to pulling the trigger and we put our pad on that trigger and we're pulling it to the rear, that reticle should be exactly where we want it. And by the time that I pull the trigger and it breaks, I have follow through. And with follow through, I mean, I pull the trigger and I hold it to the rear. I'm not slapping the trigger. I'm not pulling it and then taking my finger off. I'm pulling it. I feel the shot break. I watch my reticle fall back onto the target. And then if I wanted to rack my bolt or reset with a semi-automatic long range gun, then I could. So with trigger reset and pulling the trigger, obviously, I think it's pretty common nowadays that you'll breathe in, you'll breathe out, and at the end of your exhale, before 3 to 5 seconds, before your heart starts picking up, you want to go ahead and pull that trigger. You want to depress it. So once you depress it, you have follow through. You watch your crosshairs fall back onto the target, and then if you can, you watch for your bullet impacts. Now, without the proper position and behind the gun, you're not going to be able to do that because your gun's going to recoil. It's going to jump somewhere else, and you're going to have to try and locate your target again. Usually by that time, your round's already hit the target and it's missed, or you don't know where it's impacted. You may have hit it and you don't know where you impacted. So for pulling the trigger, obviously the breathing comes into play, and then follow through with what you're doing with your trigger finger, and then also your reticle. So
now some people I've heard or read that they try to shoot when their heart isn't beating. They squeeze the trigger between heartbeats.
And I'll tell you right now, I've never done that in my life.
Okay.
You can, I guess. But the type of shooting that I've always done, more realistic shooting, where I'm not sitting on a range and I have that type of time to do that. It's more snapshots. Hey, you've got a chance to get in position and shoot this animal, or you've got a chance to get in position and take this shot. I've got too many other things I'm paying attention to other than my heart rate. I do want to be calm, but yeah, that's not something that I think is really, really relevant. I haven't heard too many people teaching that anymore.
Okay. So your sequence again, one more time for the listeners on squeezing the trigger. So everything's set up, everything's aligned. Now you're going to take the shot.
Yep. So I'll take my position. I'll run through my checklist on my position. From there, I'll make sure that my elevation is either set on my turrets correctly or I'm holding correctly in my optic. So I'll go elevation, and then I'll look at my parallax knob if my optic has a parallax knob on the side, and I'll check my parallax. After I check my parallax, I'll check to make sure the cant of the weapon system, my reticle, is even with the earth, right? That's when like having a level on your gun is extremely important. With a lot shooting in the mountains, you have to have a level on your gun, something that a lot of people don't do. So I'll check my cant, making sure my gun's level. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and start reading the wind. And either I can dial wind or I can hold wind. A lot of times people are holding wind based off the reticles they have in their optics these days. Now we come to actually pulling the trigger. We've done our entire checklist. We've read the wind. We've made a wind call. We're going to pull the trigger. I breathe in. I breathe out however many times I need to get relaxed. I close my eyes. I open my eyes, trying to get a natural point of aim. And then I go ahead, pull the trigger to the rear as slowly as possible until it breaks. It should always surprise you. The shot breaks. You hold that trigger to the rear. You watch your reticle fall back into the target. And then you can go ahead and reset or rack your bolt.
So, folks, that's a lot of instruction, but that's, I don't know. What are your courses at Brandon Rock Canyon? What do you charge for your courses?
So the courses there, they're $1,800 per person per day. This is where luxury meets long range shooting. 100%. So when we come out there and we do this instruction, one, obviously you're getting the first class instruction, the world class instruction, but mixed with the world class accommodations. And so when they go and they pick you up from the airport and they drive you to Brandon Rock Canyon, you're paying for just an absolutely amazing experience. When I first went to Brandon Rock and I got to the driveway, that's when my eyes opened up. I was like, where has this place been my entire life? And I started driving down this about a 4-mile long driveway until you get down to the actual lodge itself. Just the scenery, the location you're in, is just absolutely insane. And then when we start talking about that, obviously the accommodations are
in a wine cellar and all that.
I like saying that they're 7-star. So, I do a lot of work in the GCC countries selling sniper and reconnaissance products as well. And they've got 7-star hotels. And I never knew about this. I'm like, what the heck's a 7-star hotel? Well, apparently a 7-star hotel like spits gold out at you when you put in your credit card. So since they've got that over there, I like comparing Brandon Rock Canyon to a 7-star because this is an experience that you can't get in many other places, none that I know of. You just can't get this type of luxury with the terrain and the views and the shooting that we're doing. So it's one thing to be able to take a shooting course on a flat range. It's another thing to be able to take a shooting course in the terrain that mimics what you'll actually be hunting in. And so when we're doing that, we're actually learning, hey, our positions are huge. Are we shooting up? Are we shooting down? And then all the animals out there, they've got about every single animal around the world, life-size AR 500 half-inch thick steel targets. What I love about it is most of them, they have the flapper plates for the kill zone. So then I can say, hey, 100%, if that flapper plate didn't move, then that was a fail. So going up there and shooting from the terrain that you'll actually be shooting from on targets that are realistic in nature. We've got robotic 3D targets that, we'll bring out there. So targets that are actually moving. So now we have a 10-inch plate that may be at a light walk moving towards us, which is realistic, or maybe moving away from us. So either way, so the reality behind the training is really what sets it apart. But yeah, so that's where we start getting into the $1,800 per person per day. And it's more of an exclusive branch, but for the training courses, if anybody wants to come and attend the training, they can. Once they get to know you and everything, and you want to go out there and you want to do a hunt, that's how they get to know you. And that's how you get into doing the elk hunts out there.
How does somebody get a hold of Brandon Rock Canyon?
You can just look up their website online, BrandonRockCanyon.com. They're on Instagram at Brandon Rock Canyon. So either one of those methods will work. They could follow my Instagram, which is IMS Sniper Cadre. And all my stuff is linked to Brandon Rock Canyon as well.
Since I've been at the facility when it was Brandon under a different name, the accommodations and food, shelter, and everything that you have, it's worth more than $500 a day, any place in the world.
Yeah, it is. They bring in a 5-star chef that's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here, Mark, before we close is that, okay, if you look at any long distance shooting course, they may be in the marketplace today. What are they? $500 to $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
Other shooting courses.
Yeah.
I think that's about right. And hey, anybody,
right.
correct me if I'm wrong. Just reach out to me at whitetailrendezvous@gmail.com and say, Bruce, no, I can go to Utah and spend $1,000 for 3 days, but you're not going to have the accommodation. I guarantee you that.
I do courses through my own business and they're cheap. We're talking like $250 per person per day. And I'm telling you right now, like, you don't get anywhere near the experience that you get when you shoot it at Branded Rock Canyon. I don't have the terrain that they have out there. I don't have the targetry that they have out there. There's courses out there that are extremely, extremely cheap, and you can tell the difference immediately. So this is more for a person that wants to go and do a shooting course and maybe take themselves or their family or their wives, and they want to be taken care of while they're there. They don't want to have any worries. They don't want to have to find accommodations that are going to meet their standards, and they don't want to have to find accommodations that are going to have food that are going to meet their standards. So there's zero issues with that there. Yeah.
Right. And the closest airport is Grand Junction. I think it's 70, 80 miles away.
No, it's not bad. It's about an hour trip from Grand Junction to.
Okay. So it's 60 miles. It's 60 miles. Yep. Mark, thank you so much. And I want to get back. I want to have you back. Will you commit to coming back again?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I had a great time.
Because I want to talk about canting, because it took me a while, and I've been fortunate to hunt a lot, and it took me a while to figure out that I have to have a level on my gun or I'm going to miss shots, in the mountains. And I'm not talking anything over 400 yards. It's that critical. And canting is something that a lot of people don't think about, but I think it impacts any shot you make with a rifle. Your thoughts on that, and we'll close.
Yeah. For 5 degrees of cant, I talk in mils. So the guys out there that know mils, for every 5 degrees you have in your weapon system of cant, you're going to miss the target by about 0.1 mils for every 100 meters. And it's going to be in that direction and low. So that's huge. 5 degrees is nothing. When you start talking about 2.5 degrees, if I'm looking at a target at 1,000 meters, 2.5 degrees, that means I'm going to miss it by 0.5 mils. And the common, we'll say 20 inches wide is about 0.4 mils wide. I don't know the exact math. About 1,000 meters, about 0.4 mils wide. So if I'm missing off by 0.5 just from a 2.5 degree cant, that's huge.
You're not going to hit an elk.
No, you'll miss.
You'll miss every time. So with that, I'm excited to have Mark back because we're going to go from muzzle to the butt of the stock. And that's what we're going to talk about the next show. But I've got another show coming up. And so, Mark, this has been great. Hey, say hi to Amy and tell her I'll be giving her a call because I need to get up there and do a Facebook Live promo for him.
All right, will do. Thanks again for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.